Hello, I'm Robin Koval, President and CEO of Truth Initiative, the nation's largest public health organization dedicated to achieving a culture where young people reject smoking, vaping, and nicotine. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's Truth Initiative Impact Series, Unvaping America's Youth. E-cigarette use remains pervasive and at epidemic levels among our nation's youth, with more than 3.6 million teens vaping. Despite the tobacco industry's insistence to regulators that e-cigarettes are intended for and marketed to adult smokers, the data show that youth and young adults continue to vape e-cigarettes at very high rates. In fact, at more than 4 times the rates of adult use. Today, nearly 1 in 5 high school students uses e-cigarettes, with nearly 40% of them using these products almost every day. And the science is clear. E-cigarettes are uniquely dangerous for young people. Beyond the physical risks of inhaling something into your lungs, many of the most popular e-cigarettes contain very high levels of nicotine. And nicotine is highly addictive. We also know that nicotine impacts the developing brain. It can reduce attention, learning, and memory, and even worsen anxiety and depression. All this during a growing mental health crisis among young people. And that's why Truth Initiative is working to unvape America's youth, to prevent young people from starting in the first place, as well as helping the millions of already addictive young people quit. Through our Truth brand, we're taking a multi-pronged approach to address this problem. For example, via our Truth media-delivered national public education campaign, with direct help in quitting via our evidence-proven This Is Quitting text message program designed specifically for youth and young adults, and at the community level with our school curriculum titled Vaping Know the Truth, which is free to educators and is now being used in thousands of schools across the country. All of our efforts seek to change the culture, denormalize vaping, and normalize quitting to put an end to this epidemic and get us back on track to making tobacco and nicotine use a thing of the past. Our panel today will discuss ways to holistically reverse the youth e-cigarette epidemic. In addition to our experts, we'll hear directly from a young person on what it's like to vape and quit e-cigarettes during these unprecedented times. And we'll spotlight the evidence-based results from a paper recently published in JAMA Internal Medicine demonstrating the effectiveness of This Is Quitting in helping young adults to quit vaping e-cigarettes, the first randomized clinical trial on any vaping cessation intervention. To help set the stage, I want to share a short video to explain how This Is Quitting works.
Young people know it's an epidemic.
The number of high school kids who were vaping went up 78%.
Young people know vaping is everywhere.
1 in 5 high school kids have
Young people know how addictive nicotine and e-cigarettes can be. But what young people don't know is how to stop. This is how. This Is Quitting, the first of its kind free text message program from Truth to help teens and young adults quit vaping e-cigarettes for good. For over 2 decades, Truth Initiative and the Truth Campaign have given young people the facts about the risks of tobacco. Our digital quit smoking programs have helped hundreds of thousands of people break free from nicotine addiction. This Is Quitting combines this wealth of expertise to bring you a powerful quit vaping program designed specifically for young people. It features clinically proven advice from quitting experts and support from other young people who have used the program. Whether you're ready to set a quit date or are still deciding, This Is Quitting gives you the useful steps to take today to start your journey to ditch your vape for good. Everyone has a cell phone, and text messaging is the preferred way to communicate. This Is Quitting provides help the way you want it, anonymously and privately, and it's available 24/7 for support right when you need it. This Is Quitting is easy to use. Just text Ditch Vape to 88709 and you're in. You'll get non-judgmental tips and advice and tons of encouragement from other young people who know what you're going through. Even if you feel like you're the only one quitting, you're not alone. Since we launched the program 2 years ago, the response has been incredible. More than 350,000 young people have enrolled in This Is Quitting, and it's working. And now, a clinical trial found This Is Quitting increased quit rates among young adults aged 18 to 24 by nearly 40% compared to a control group. But the best news is the real impact This Is Quitting is having on real people.
Love you. Thanks so much for all of the help. I'm feeling confident already.
This is amazing. I've never gotten this much support right off the bat.
Thank you for your help, even if you're not real.
They come every day, and they're always there when you need them.
This is working. This is freedom. This is the fight to live vape and nicotine-free lives. This is quitting.
Our discussion today is being moderated by Jamie Ducharme, a health correspondent at Time and author of the recently published book, Big Vape, The Incendiary Rise of Juul. It's a terrific book that I highly recommend. It reads like a novel and paints a comprehensive picture of how Juul led the way in putting a new generation at risk of nicotine addiction. In addition to vaping, Jamie has covered health topics ranging from COVID-19 to face transplants for Time, and her work has won awards for feature and profile writing. Thanks for joining us today, Jamie, and leading this important discussion. So over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Robin, for that introduction. And thank you all for joining us today. Before we dive into the discussion, I will quickly introduce each of our panelists. First, we have Dr. Amanda Graham, who is the Chief of Innovations at the Truth Initiative. In that work, Dr. Graham leads a cross-functional team that develops, evaluates, and markets digital products for tobacco cessation. Dr. Graham led the development of the X program, a digital tobacco cessation platform designed for employers and health plans, and This Is Quitting, as you heard, a first-of-its-kind quit vaping program for teens and young adults. Dr. Graham is also an adjunct professor of medicine at the Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science. And we are also joined by Sam, who is a former vapor who was inspired by Truth to quit. He is currently a 19-year-old college student at the University of South Carolina Upstate. He began vaping during his sophomore year of high school and tried several times to quit, but recently succeeded after seeing Truth posts on Instagram. And he has been nicotine-free for about 3 months. We are joined by Meredith Berkman, who is the co-founder of Parents Against Vaping E-Cigarettes, or PAVE, which is a national advocacy and education organization created in response to the youth vaping epidemic. PAVE advocates at the local, state, and federal levels for an end to the sale of flavored e-cigarettes and other flavored tobacco products. And PAVE also provides free training, resources, and education for parents who want to learn more about vaping and the tobacco industry. Last but not least, we have Dr. Rachel Boykin, who is a pediatrician on the executive committee of the American Academy of Pediatrics section on nicotine and tobacco prevention and treatment. In addition, Dr. Boykin is a professor of pediatrics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University and a pediatric hospitalist at Stony Brook Children's Hospital. Dr. Boykin spearheaded a partnership between Stony Brook Children's and the New York State Smokers Quit Line, or its Opt to Quit program, which was the first implementation of this electronic referral program at a children's hospital. And she continues to work on nicotine cessation today. So with all of that said, I'm going to start with a question to Sam, because Sam has done what we are all here to talk about today, which is to quit vaping. So Sam, I would love it if you could start with just a little about your experience. When did you start vaping, and what inspired you to quit?
So actually I got involved with vaping through a couple friends back in my sophomore year of high school. I was 16 years old. That continued on till after graduation into college. College students were using them all around me. And recently I was inspired to quit because I had been seeing the ads from Truth on Instagram and a couple other places, and actually enrolled in This Is Quitting, and gave me some accountability in that way. And that was what helped me to quit and made me realize how great I felt about quitting. So I really wanted to get involved and help other people quit. So that's why I'm here today.
Great. And could you tell us a little bit about what it was like to actually quit? I mean, how difficult was that? And what did you find helped or didn't help?
That's a huge topic, Jamie. It's really, really hard for, nicotine's very highly addictive, and it was a little challenging at first, but with the help of Truth and the accountability of This Is Quitting, it really, really made it the load 10 times easier in the sense of actually getting free of nicotine. It was something I thought I could never do. It was just, that was the hardest part of it, was taking the first step of enrolling and saying, I'm going to join This Is Quitting, and this is how I'm going to stop. And once I took that first step, it got a lot easier in the sense of it's made the addiction feel like it was going away. And there was a couple of physical side effects at first, just headaches and little bit of dizziness and whatnot. But other than that, it was a lot easier to bear thanks to Truth.
That's great. Congratulations for doing that. That's wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Graham, I want to go back to you. We've heard a lot about This Is Quitting already today, but I would love to just hear more about, what it entails and why it works, and most importantly, does it work?
Yeah, so let me tackle the first part of your question in terms of how it works. You saw a lot of good information in the video. Enrolling is simple. Just as a reminder, you just have to text Ditch Vape to 88709. This is a free program. It's a confidential program. As you heard, it's based on text messaging, which we know is really the preferred way that young people choose to communicate. They can engage easily and discreetly without necessarily having to disclose to an adult that they're interested in quitting, or even that they're vaping. In terms of the content of the program, it is grounded in the best practices for treating nicotine addiction among young people, and it delivers practical, evidence-based advice about how to quit. As Sam mentioned, daily reminders showing up on your phone, we know from a good bit of literature around text messaging, create that sense of accountability that keeps people connected to an initial decision of, I'm going to do this. The messages themselves are tailored by age. We deliver a different program for 13 to 17-year-olds than we do for 18 to 24-year-olds. The program is also tailored around the particular device, the brand that someone's using, and their quit date, if they choose to set one. Certainly, people are able to use the program if they haven't decided that they're ready to quit. We designed the program to be highly interactive. These are not simply messages that users are passively receiving. There are a lot of open-ended questions to engage people in the process of quitting, multiple choice questions. And there are keywords that people can use middle of the night, first thing in the morning, for on-demand support to get more beyond those scheduled messages. But the key thing about how the program works is that most of the messages have been written by other young people. We give users the opportunity to submit content. Some of them can be tips and strategies. Some of them are just messages of encouragement. And what that says to other people using the program is that lots of other people are quitting and that quitting is possible. To the second part of your question, in terms of whether it works, we really think about this in two ways. And the first is whether young people are actually using the program. You can see the data on this slide here, that since we launched This Is Quitting in January of 2019, close to 350,000 young people have enrolled. You can see the split is about 60-40, more young adults than teens. We've consistently seen between 500 and 1,000 young people enrolling each day. And anybody who does work with young people knows that those are really unprecedented results. It really speaks to the need and the demand for a program like this. 64% set a quit date. We're seeing most of them set a quit date the day they enroll. The vast majority are using, actually about half are using those extra support keywords to get more out of the program, and 2/3 complete the full 2-month program. The second way that we think about effectiveness is obviously in terms of quit rates. Does this program actually help people to break free from e-cigarettes? And here we completed, as Robin mentioned, to our knowledge, what is the first randomized clinical trial of any quit vaping intervention. We recruited about 2,600 young adults from all over the US and randomly assigned them either to receive This Is Quitting on their phone or to a comparison condition. And what we found at a long-term follow-up, this was 7 months after they had enrolled in the study, that participants who received messages from This Is Quitting were 40% more likely to be abstinent. And that was a pretty rigorous measure of abstinence. That was no vaping over the past 30 days. Also, as Robin mentioned, we published these in a very prominent journal, JAMA Internal Medicine, and are really excited to have this work start to provide a benchmark and to fill what has been a gap in the scientific literature. The reason that we think about effectiveness from both of those angles, both from uptake and in terms of quit rates, is that it absolutely takes success on both fronts in order to make a population impact on behavior like e-cigarette use. We've seen some programs that show promise in some academic studies, but then they don't get used by young people, and vice versa. We've seen popular apps and other programs that are being very heavily marketed that don't have data showing actually whether they help people to quit vaping. And so we're really excited that This Is Quitting is working on both fronts in terms of appeal to young people and in driving quit rates.
And you mentioned a few ways that the text messages are tailored depending on who is receiving them. I'm curious if you found anything in your research about who this program works for best, if there is sort of a target user, if you will.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we wanted to make sure that our study could address that question. And so that's one of the reasons that we recruited such a large sample. 2,600 people is considered a very large study. And what you can see, I think there are data on the slide now, are that participants in the trial were really diverse across a range of characteristics. About half were male, 17% were racial and ethnic minorities, 19% were sexual minorities, which is an overrepresentation, and about a third told us that they were struggling financially. These were primarily daily vapers that vape within 30 minutes of waking. That's long been a marker of nicotine dependence. And we also saw strong signals of nicotine dependence on a number of other measures that we administered. You can see on the right-hand side of the slide, these are data from a measure that's called the Hooked on Nicotine Checklist that asks users to endorse particular items. This is a yes-no measure. And we saw very high percentages of people saying, yes, I have felt like I've been addicted to vaping. Yes, I do have strong cravings to vape. We also had about a third of the sample that were smoking cigarettes. 60% reported that they were using marijuana. Binge drinking was extremely common, and about half the sample screened positive for anxiety or depression. So these were young people, young adults, who brought other life challenges with them to the process of quitting vaping. And we conducted a number of analyses to see if our program was more or less effective for particular subgroups. And what we were really pleased to see is that This Is Quitting outperformed this control condition across all of the subgroups that we looked at. Even those with very high levels of nicotine dependence, this approach does work for a broad range of young people.
And Dr. Graham, one last question, and then I'll stop putting you on the spot. But is there any plan to expand this to older adults as well?
Our next plan is to conduct a very similar trial to evaluate the program among teens. So this first trial that was just published was among 18 to 24-year-olds. We'll be launching a study in July that will evaluate the program among 13 to 17-year-olds. And that's really the biggest gap in the literature in terms of understanding what works, how it works. And certainly, to Robin's point, both areas are of critical importance because this is the age group where vaping rates are highest.
And Dr. Boykin, I think that's a wonderful segue to talk about some of your work. We've just heard so much about how This Is Quitting works, but as someone who really works in this field and has dedicated much of your practice to this issue, I mean, what else do we still need? What could be added to the treatment landscape, in your opinion?
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I'm so excited about this new study, and I just want to underscore that again because this is what we need. We need data. We have such a dearth of research. Those of us who are trying to manage the big problem of nicotine addiction, as Sam alluded to, we don't have a lot to guide us, and we're used to having evidence base for what we do. And so I think this is wonderful information, and I'm really following it on the edge of my seat. I think in the end, what's probably going to be the answer, if there's going to be an answer for addressing nicotine addiction in teens, particularly in young adults, is something that's going to be multifactorial. We know that behavioral interventions can work. We know that there may be some role for nicotine replacement. That has been sort of the standard for adults who need help with smoking cessation. The studies we have in kids are limited and sort of equivocal at best. So that's sort of jury's still out. But knowing how addictive nicotine is, I think for some individuals, they may need some of that, those medications to help tide them over the cravings. Again, the text messaging, as Amanda mentioned, it really speaks to teens where they're probably in their world the best, and it seems to engage them the most. And so I'm really excited about that. But I think it's going to be multi-pronged, and we have to wait and see.
Sure. And could you talk at all about the other work that you are doing and your colleagues are doing at the AAP, and what else you are working on in this space?
Yeah, there's a lot of work being done, and I think a lot of work looking to address nicotine use in many different settings, including school settings and in the community, and of course to help pediatricians. One of the problems is pediatricians like myself, we have, as I mentioned, we really have very little to go on, and so I think I can generalize by saying the majority of pediatricians are still very uncomfortable at knowing what to do with a teenager who is addicted or dependent on nicotine. One of the things that I'm excited about, in addition to this new study, is some work I did recently in the fall of 2019 with the AAP with support from the CDC's Office on Smoking and Health. We had a 3-day summit, which I was privileged to be part of the planning committee for and then participated in. That involved about 30 invited experts, researchers, addiction specialists, clinicians like myself, pediatricians, family medicine docs, and other healthcare providers who work with teens and young adults. And the goal of this was really to figure out what recommendations can we make to create a clinical resource guide for pediatricians and people to help them in this process where we really are feeling kind of rudderless. So we spent 3 days brainstorming, reviewing all the literature that existed at the time, and then putting that all together to make recommendations and compile a list of resources. And so I'm really excited. It's almost ready. It's going to be an online resource. It's now been approved by both the AAP and the CDC, and it's supposed to go live. The web page is being built right now, sometime in early July. And then for dissemination in mid-July. So I'm very excited about that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And Meredith, I know you come at this work from a slightly different lens, from the parent perspective, someone who lived through this with your own children and the children of your friends. What do you, after doing your work with PAVE, speaking with parents across the country who are in a similar position, what do you see as sort of a gap that still needs to be filled? I'll stop there. I have follow-ups for you, but we'll start with that one.
First of all, I'm really thrilled to be here with this A team of panelists, and really the study and the information that's been released about This Is Quitting in some ways is sort of the first formal good news that we parents have had, because we represent the 3.6 million families across the country whose lives have been upended by the youth vaping epidemic. Of course, that's a reference to the number of teens that we know are vaping on a regular basis. And we hear from parents all the time saying, what can I do? What can we do to help our kids quit? So finally, to be able to say there is evidence that this will help. I mean, I know lots of parents who have done this program alongside their kids. And so, again, finally to have something that has evidence behind it that we can give parents who feel really powerless, because it is so hard to support your kids when they want to quit. So this is really big news for us.
You mentioned this is the first formal good news we've had, but I'm curious, in all those conversations with parents, I mean, has there any informal good news come up? Has there been a strategy that you have found works for many families, or anything that you can suggest to parents who might be in this position?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we do with our education work is we actually train the trainers. That is, we provide a curricula for parents that they can then be empowered to go into their own communities and teach other parents about the dangers of vaping. And one of the things that we emphasize is how important it is to have open communication with your kids. And so that's something that that we emphasize to parents is to educate yourself, so that you understand what's sort of happening out there, and then to empower yourself and empower your kids to come to you if they're struggling. And so I think that telling your kids that you want to partner with them in dealing with this problem, rather than having them feel that there will be something punitive. It's not that there are no boundaries or no expectations from a parent perspective on what your child might be doing, but to really let them know that you understand how pervasive this is, you understand what the pressures are, and if they come to you because they want help, getting help, you will be open and supportive. So that's really, from the parent perspective, teaching your kids to come to you and now giving them ways to help themselves. And this is, of course, a perfect example. That's something that we think is really important.
Great, thank you. And while we're on the topic of good news, as Meredith alluded, I mean, the number of teenagers who vape is still quite high, but it has gone down somewhat from 2019. And I would love to open it up to the group and just ask if that is a trend that you are optimistic will continue. Do you expect that number to keep going down?
I'll just say very quickly, and not being a doctor and not being a researcher, but being on the ground and speaking to so many parents across the country. I'll give you an example. In the LA Unified School Districts, we've been, reaching out to superintendents and reaching out to principals. And what we're hearing from them is that as the kids were coming back at the end of the year, this was such an odd year, and there was, hybrids or kids who never came back. The kids themselves are expressing to the educators that, in fact, they think not only has the problem not dissipated, but it may have gotten worse. And I would think that tracks with a lot of the conversation and reporting about the increase in anxiety and the mental health issue for teens, which is well documented so far.
Yeah, I would have to completely agree. I think one could say, well, this is great. We're down from almost 30% to just under 20%. But when we stop to think about that, 1 in 5 kids using these products is alarming anyway. It's just relatively a decrease, but it's not really, it's still a huge problem. And then add to that the recent data that we have that now kids are using it, way of those kids who are using it, they're using it daily. A huge percentage of them are using it daily, which to me really speaks to the addiction. And I think that's really a big problem. I think until we really change the culture around e-cigarettes and vaping, we're not going to solve this problem. I think one of the problems is that there's still advertising. There's still a lot of misunderstanding, even after we had sort of some publicity about them in late 2019 with the whole EVALI outbreak, where people started to, I would take care of kids in the hospital and they'd be like, oh, these things are bad for you. Well, yes. And then we could start the conversation, but that's the tip of the iceberg. Still, people have a lot of misconceptions about them. They're still perceived as safer. They're still accessible, way more so than cigarettes, which are now so highly regulated that at least we have, the culture has changed on that. Kids don't want to smoke, but we're not there at all. And so whether we're seeing a little bit of a decrease, we're in such a different zone with this that I think it's something that we can't reassure ourselves with at all.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Dr. Boykin in the sense that now there's still 1 in 5 teens vaping, and that is a huge number. I've noticed that the people that I know that are still vaping, they are the people that are using them every single day, every single hour, almost, and it's a terrible, terrible life habit, and really destructive to a person's, especially a young person's, mind and their physical attributes and just in the mental health. Just it really, really is a big problem. And the people that are still using them, that still know all the risk, so to say, they're the ones that are still wanting to use them.
Sam, could you talk about what it's like to have quit vaping and still be among so many teenagers who have not quit and people who are doing this every day?
At first, whenever I quit, there were a lot of my friends kind of distanced themselves from me in the sense that I didn't want them to feel like I was judging them. And I've worked really, really hard to paint the portrait that I'm not judging at all. I just told my friend, actually, I was talking to another one of my friends, I won't say his name on recording, but I was talking to him yesterday about it, and he was like, hey man, you still quit vaping? And I said, yeah, I'm over 3 months now. I'm happy if you want to join me. And he was like, oh no, dude, I could never do that. And that really broke my heart in the sense I'm like, yes, you can do it. It's not easy, but it's doable. And that's just what I really want to be a beacon, so to say, for the friends that are thinking about quitting and whatnot. I just really want them to be able to look over and say, oh wow, okay, Sam quit, so maybe I can. That really helped me whenever I saw This Is Quitting's ads. Whenever I was online, I saw that other people had quit vaping, and it gave me hope that it can be done.
Well, one of the things that makes this even more complicated and difficult for the parents is that these products have been created so that they go unnoticed. They are stealth by design, and that while what you say is true, I think across the board that parents, must, can, and should be involved in their children's lives when their kids are young. I think we also have to understand that these products led by Juul, but with certainly many other Juul imitators and plenty of bad actors to go around in this crisis, they were targeted at kids and they have upended the social norm. So we hear this all the time, even the most involved parents, even the parents who have been present, who have been, discussing these topics with their kids, even they can very easily, and I'll speak for myself, have a child using them. So while I hear you and I agree with you to some degree, I think we also have to remember that this is a predatory industry with stealth by design products and social media marketing that was deliberately created to go below the radar to target you guys yourselves.
And I want to add one other piece to this, which is that even parents who are involved may not recognize just how harmful e-cigarettes may be, because again, this goes back to changing the culture, right? They have been marketed as they've been touted as a smoking cessation tool for adults, which we're not going to talk about that, but that's a whole nother body of literature that may not exist. But it's interesting. We recently did some focus groups with kids in a couple of the school districts where I live and work, and with junior high and high school kids. And one of the themes that came out was that their parents seemed clueless. What the kids wanted, two things. They wanted education for themselves. They wanted to understand better. And they wanted their parents to be educated because they said, a couple of them said, well, my parents gave me e-cigarettes because they thought it would keep me from smoking. So their parents aren't dumb. I think this is, the industry has done a very good job of creating confusion. And I think that's one of the things we really need to address is education of the community at large, particularly where youth use is involved. One could argue, well, is it safer than traditional cigarettes? But that, to me, is not the question when we're talking about kids, because these are kids who would not be smoking to begin with. We know that. And safer does not mean safe. And it's not safe for teens, period. And I think that's one of the messages we need to get across, which will help parents then partner, as Sam was talking about, with their teens to help them, because I think parental support is key. But there needs to be some understanding and buy-in first.
If I could jump in with a question, I'm curious how the wide range of products that are on the market complicates these efforts because, parents I think now are aware of Juul, but now there's Puff Bar and disposable products and the landscape is kind of always changing. I wonder if you could talk at all about how both the research world and the education worlds are keeping up with that rapid change.
From a research standpoint, it makes it enormously challenging to understand the impact of these products, how to frame questions to young people that helps them to accurately identify even the kind of question that you're asking. When we try and understand use patterns, when we try and understand level of addiction, when we try and understand the intensity with which young people are using these products, the range of products, the fact that they're not regulated, we don't know what's in them, we don't know the strength of nicotine that somebody may be using, they may not even know the strength of nicotine that they're using, makes measurement challenging and it makes evaluation challenging. We've even struggled to come up with the right terminology to connect with young people so that they accurately identify the product that they're using, so that we have some sense of, the context that this behavior is taking place in.
Well, I just would like to say that one of our frustrations is that the data collection, and I don't mean in the case of Truth, but let's say in the National Youth Tobacco Survey, the CDC's own data collection, is done understandably because it's a government, it's a bureaucracy so far in advance that, for example, the new iced flavors that so many kids are using. I mean, we hear about these iced flavors all the time. Iced flavors are menthol. The National Youth Tobacco Survey showed that almost 40% of youth are using menthol e-cigarettes. That didn't ask about iced flavors. And in fact, the CDC won't be able to ask that right question about are you using an iced flavor until 2023. So there's such a lag between what is being experienced on the ground and the time it takes for the broad data collection that the industry, as Jamie, as your question referenced, they're shape shifting as fast as they can. We're concerned about how many kids are actually using menthol e-cigarettes. As we said, almost 40%, but it's actually much larger if you look at the iced flavors. And there's only been one recent study that even talked about iced flavors just last week. I think it came out of the UCLA Medical School. And so that's a real struggle. I mean, in those earlier studies, I think from 2017, they asked kids if they were using e-cigarettes. They didn't ask if they were juuling, which is, so it took, we lost, almost a year or even more of time when this was already a huge crisis because the questions weren't asked correctly. Well, so we need to come up with interim and alternative data collection so we can keep up with the shape shifting, I think.
And then I just, to add from a clinical perspective, as a pediatrician, seeing a patient, it's very hard to quantify how much nicotine they're using. If you think about a cigarette, which is sort of the way we've defined addiction in teens, and, as an aside, we know that teens are really susceptible to addiction. That's why 90% of smokers start before the age of 18. And, they can get addicted with even infrequent use. But, if you think about a cigarette, when all these studies were done a couple decades ago, a cigarette is something that's discrete. It has about 1 milligram of nicotine. You start it, you stop it, you can quantify how much you're getting. These devices, aside from being incredibly varied and, as Meredith said, shape-shifting and evolving so quickly, they're very user-dependent. And, it may be even hard for somebody to quantify how much they're using it because it's sort of a continual process. It's in and out of your mouth. It's not one discrete thing that you do every X amount of time. Kids tend to share them. If you can adjust the voltage or the with some of the earlier models, or if you can refill it, which some people do, with different concentrations, it's really hard as a clinician to quantify how much nicotine. So then we have to go with the symptoms of addiction, which I think Amanda outlined beautifully with a hooked on nicotine checklist that was done in this research. That's something that we need to start doing, I think, more clinically, just to figure out where to classify somebody. Is somebody very addicted, or just a little bit addicted. It's very hard to treat somebody when you don't even know what's going on from that standpoint.
I'm sure we could all continue talking about this for much longer than we have today, but I'm just going to bring Robin back for one last question before we close out. To build on our earlier discussion, Robin, does Truth Initiative have any data on trends we can expect moving forward, even as soon as when kids return to school in the fall?
Well, it's a really great question, Jamie, because it's complex and requires a holistic response from all of us. I like to think of it sort of in terms of the 5 A's. In terms of how do we address access, availability, affordability of these products, their appeal for sure, and addiction liability. Maybe I'll touch on each of those a little bit. So, in terms of access, we are happy now that we have a national T21 law, and it makes it harder for kids to purchase products. But, we also know that retailers are often not effectively enforcing the law. Communities don't often have the resources to do that either. And so I think it's important because the industry likes to say that, T21 is all we need. We've got that. And that's just simply not true. It's a tool. It's not the tool. At the same time, we're also happy that retailers, some retailers have stopped selling these products. CVS, of course, probably the first to make a big statement about that. And communities do continue to enact laws that restrict where these products can be sold. Of course, those laws often get challenged by the industry. So we need to see a lot more of that kind of action on the state and local level. I talked about affordability. We know that higher taxes making products more expensive is one of the most effective ways to inhibit youth use. Young people are just really price sensitive. So that's another place where states and localities have a real role to play. That's in their power. When it comes to appeal, how attractive these products are to young people, we need the FDA to do its job. Absolutely. We have to close all these loopholes that exist in the regulatory process, do what the data clearly tells us. Flavors are highly appealing. They're entry-level gateway products for kids. And for that reason, they need to go. And that includes flavors like menthol. Meredith, thanks for talking about ice flavors. That is a big gap that the industry is sort of sneaking through. So menthol flavors and all flavors in e-cigarettes, including menthol and ice and any of these concept flavors. And that is in any form, whether it's a pod, a disposable product, the refillable liquid. And flavors also has to extend to menthol cigarettes. We're happy that the FDA has said they're going to take action there. Flavored little cigars, and even these sort of newer products, oral nicotine products, which are lozenges with no tobacco, just nicotine, that come in a lot of flavors and kids are starting to use. And the FDA also needs to address nicotine levels in e-cigarette. There's sort of a nicotine arms race going on with these products where the nicotine levels keep going up and up and becoming more and more addictive. There is no reason why a product has to have more nicotine, some of these vape products do, than a pack of cigarettes. They are just too addictive. So those are like the big ones that I think we all need to concentrate on. It does, take a village to do this, but, I also feel, I feel good that, we will be successful in ending the youth e-cigarette epidemic and creating a future where nicotine and tobacco addiction are a thing of the past. But we do have a lot of work to do still. And I'll stop there and I'll take a moment to thank you, Jamie, for doing such an excellent job bringing us all together today and moderating our panel. And, I also want to give a big thank you to Sam. You had to be, for young people, you have to be brave to speak out about these issues. So thank you. And of course, to Rachel and Meredith and Amanda, great discussion, vital information that we need. And I'm really pleased we were able to have this conversation today. So thank you.
Thank you, Robin. I appreciate the closing remarks. And I'll just say quickly, if you want any more information, you can go to truthinitiative.org. And for anyone interested in trying This Is Quitting, you can text Ditch Vape to 88709. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks so much. This was wonderful.